20th century fashion.
Secretary of State John Kerry, who along with President Obama has been calling out Russia for an outdated mentality towards Ukraine. And we're back now with our panel. Well, we are another week into the crisis in Ukraine. Russia has solidified its hold on Crimea and in fact now appears to be headed for annexation. Meanwhile, the U.S. and the European leaders, Western European leaders, seem engaged in a slowly escalating series of sanctions. George, what's your big takeaway from this week?
Well, that the administration had two theories, the first of which has already been refuted, and we just heard it, which was that this sort of thing just can't happen in the 21st century. The second theory is this, that Russia today, unlike the Soviet Union, is enmeshed in the world trading system and the world financial system in a way that binds it down like Gulliver among the Lilliputians. It has got so many webs on it that it can't behave the way it, unfortunately, is behaving. And what we're going to see is whether or not Russia's economic ties with the West immobilize Russia or immobilize the West, and that Europe becomes incapable of collective action because they're so hooked on trade with Russia.
I want to pick up Congresswoman Harman on the comment from Secretary Kerry, because you heard this over and over again this week, that the Russians are engaged in 19th century mentality. You heard President Obama, after Putin said that what they're doing is legal, say, well, he's got the wrong set of lawyers on international law. You're a Democrat, but as you like to say, you're also the head of the nonpartisan Wilson Center. Is this president, is this administration sending a tough enough message to Putin?
I think they're sending the right message to Putin. Just demonizing Putin, as Henry Kissinger said in his excellent op-ed, is not a strategy. Just a couple more comments. Vladimir Putin doesn't know the Colin Powell rule. If you break it, you own it. And if he breaks up Crimea, he's going to own their pension liabilities, their tanked economy at a time when the Russian economy is stretched. And I don't think it matters if he's living in the 19th century or the 14th century. He is living in a networked world, and his stock market has tanked $13 billion. It is true that international firms, a lot of them U.S.-based, like PepsiCo and John Deere and others, have huge economic stakes in Russia. But I bet they're having board meetings and coming up with Plan B. And let's not forget the gas exports from the United States. If we can extract gas safely, consistent with environmental goals, we should be exporting it to Europe, and we should take out their dependence on Russia. And so I think Vladimir Putin may have a short-term strategy in the 21st century, but he sure hasn't got a medium or long-term strategy in the 21st century.
So, Senator Santorum, do you agree with the Congresswoman that Putin is actually losing here and we're winning?
No, I don't agree that he's losing. I think he can lose, and I think if we do the right things, that there's a good chance he will lose. But the bottom line is, up until this point, I think what President Obama has done in as far as policies about, sending our military into the Baltic and saying the tough language that he's saying, in the last couple of weeks he's done a reasonably good job. The problem is 5 years before that, he has said all the wrong signals to Putin, and whether it's with Syria or Iran or pulling the defensive missiles out of Poland and the Czech Republic. From day one, this has been an appeasement and trying to bring and reset the relationship with Russia. And the problem is now we've seen the result of that. He can get tough now, but it's hard to get tough when you're cutting the defense budget by $100 billion.
I just want to point out what Defense Secretary Gates said. And he said, look, in 2008, the Russians went into Georgia and invaded and took away 2 provinces from Georgia. Nobody would have said that George W. Bush was soft on the use of military force. I mean, is it possible just the Russians do what the Russians do?
I'm not suggesting that what George Bush did at that time was sufficient either. But
he certainly hadn't set a policy of appeasement.
He didn't set a policy of appeasement, but he certainly set ground rules that there would be a response when action was taken, and he didn't in that case. He didn't really respond in any kind of meaningful way.
But what can you do? I mean, particularly when the Europeans are as small and as slowly escalating as the U.S. sanctions are, the Europeans are even slower and more reluctant. So what can he do?
I think the energy issue is a big one. Jane was absolutely right about providing alternatives to Europe to gas, but we have a president who is slowing down. You talk about slow walking. There are, I think, 15 or 20 terminals that are trying to be constructed to export national gas. I think 2 so far have been approved. It's been years in the process. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight. That's a problem.
I want to bring in Ronna because this is right in your wheelhouse, these issues. And you had John Boehner, the House Speaker, with an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about export more gas and more oil to Europe. You reduce Russia's leverage. You hurt the Russian economy. Realistically, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. Realistically, is that something we could do? And particularly, is it something we could do in the near term?
Not quickly. My takeaway from this whole thing is I'm so glad the U.S. is becoming more and more energy independent. That's a great thing, and we should speed up the sort of creation of all kinds of fuel systems in the U.S. We only produce about 3 billion barrels a day of shale gas and oil right now. We use about 90 billion barrels a day of fossil fuels ourselves. So I don't think we're going to solve Europe's energy problem. But what this does say is that petropolitics are problematic wherever you are. We need to speed up the production of shale gas. We're going to need that for our own manufacturing sector, though I don't see us becoming a major exporter in the near future.
In the time we have left, George, where are we headed? And particularly because we're going to have a vote a week from today, a referendum. Does Crimea end up being subsumed and become a part of Russia, the first time that this would have happened since World War II?
Are we going to be up late at night waiting for the outlying precincts to come in Crimea? The Crimean Parliament voted to have this referendum and voted unanimously. Gives you some sense of the diversity of opinion that's permitted in Crimea right now. We're approaching this in the language of Marxism. That is, we're the ones who believe in economic determinism. If his stock market tanks, if the oligarchs have trouble with their wealth. I'm not sure Vladimir Putin thinks that way. He's thinking like a nationalist, not in terms of economic categories.
All right, we have to step aside for a moment, but when we come back...
For the past year, the Central Republican accusation